Well, I want to ask you for sure, and I'm sure our students are as well, several questions about the policy-making capacity of Congress, and also in your area in particular of science, and also about the changes that the Republican majority have brought into the Congress. That's a very important area that we want to get into with you. But first of all, before I ask any more questions, I want to bring the students in and see if they would like to start weighing in with their own. So why don't you just raise your hands and I'll call on you and we'll take it from there. So who would like to go first with a question? John?
Recently, national security has been very politicized. And I'm curious if you can comment through your experience under Reagan, Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, and how, along with that, with the politicization of national security, that's also led to a shift in power from Congress to the executive branch.
Well, I think by and large, whether you have an R or a D after your name, my experiences over the years, you've been very supportive of the Department of Defense, for example, or any effort in the national security arena. And there hasn't been that partisanship so much. Oh, I go way back in my staff days when there was Vietnam, there was some partisanship there, and a lot of people would look back on that and say, boy, we should have done things differently. But then you go forward to the present involvement in Iraq. And one of the things I point out to people who are so critical of our decision, Congress's decision, to give the authority to the President of the United States to take action he deemed necessary to protect our national security interests. The thing I point out to my partisan friends, look at John Kerry and John Edwards, who led the Democrat ticket in the last presidential election, voted the same way as people like Sherwood Boehlert or Tom DeLay voted. But we were operating on the information available at that time. Looking back, hindsight is 20/20. Would we have done things differently? Of course we would have. But I don't think there is that overall partisanship on national security issues or defense-related issues. I don't think it breaks down to R versus D. And you tend to find some more support from members of Congress who have significant direct impact in their districts, a major defense contractor in their districts. You might find a member of Congress, regardless of party affiliation, who is very mindful of the fact that this is an economic engine for his or her district, and therefore be more supportive than maybe ordinarily that individual might be. But I really don't see that partisanship in those two arenas. There's some strong differences of opinion, but not so much partisanship. There's no one arguing that we dramatically reduce overall defense spending. There are a lot of arguments over how we're directing defense spending. There are a lot of arguments about the need to reduce waste, fraud, and abuse, which is sort of an easy way to say, oh, I'd vote for less money for defense, because if we eliminated waste, fraud, and abuse, we'd only have left the money necessary to support our troops and give them the best equipment and the best training, et cetera, et cetera.
Let me just follow up on that question because it raises the question of the role of Congress versus the role of the executive branch. And you've certainly been aware that there are many experts who study the Congress, and Democrats in particular, who complain that there has not been enough exercise of the congressional responsibility to engage in oversight of the executive branch. Do you think that Congress is playing the role that it was intended to play with respect to overseeing how the war is managed, overseeing how foreign policy is managed, and perhaps other issues as well? Is congressional oversight, in your view, and particularly with respect to the war, has it been as aggressive as some would like to see it be?
The direct answer is no, but let me qualify that by saying it's not just the war or foreign policy. One of the shortcomings of Congress, if I were to give Congress a report card where I'd give it a check needs to improve, is in oversight generally, not just the current Congress with the current majority. Throughout my years in Congress, no matter who was in charge, there's a tendency on the part of people in the legislative branch to have a problem identified, to address it, you had hearings, and then you develop legislation, you pass the legislation, say, boy, we've done our job, let's go on to the next thing, and not pause to look back to see if what you did was having the intended effect, if it was working the way you envisioned it. So that is an indictment overall on the House and the Senate and Republicans and Democrats. We don't do enough oversight, and we've got to do more of that in the future.
Why is that, though?
Well, because I just think that, first of all, we've got, one of the things the Republicans did, I think, made a lot of sense, back in '94 when we got the majority. One of the first things we did is eliminate a lot of subcommittees. And there were actually conversations about eliminating committees altogether. Some of them were really dumb ideas. Let's eliminate the Department of Education and therefore the committees in Congress dealing with education, because that's a state responsibility. Well, fortunately, that died a natural death. There was even a suggestion that they should, at that time, eliminate the Science Committee and take some of the responsibilities of the Science Committee and assign them to the other committees. So you deal with all the agencies covered by the Science Committee, but you wouldn't have a committee dedicated to that. And quite frankly, the only reason it was saved was because Newt Gingrich was the speaker at the time, and he had a natural curiosity and a love affair with science. But even more important, his best friend and one of his able lieutenants in that whole revolution that took place that brought the Republicans to majority status was a guy named Bob Walker, senior congressman at the time from Pennsylvania, and he was due to be the chairman of this Committee on Science. So the speaker's natural inclination to support science, plus his personal relationship with a key advisor, saved science, and it's proven to be, back 12 years later, I think one of the most valuable committees of the Congress. But oversight is, you want to deal with a problem, you want to spend time in working out all the angles of it, and then you're absolutely convinced that, boy, we've done a good deed, and we've addressed this problem in a meaningful way, and you put out your press releases, and then you want to go to the next thing. And I suppose that's human nature, but there should be some time pausing and going to the next thing and coming up with these new grand ideas to, I would almost obligate that you have to have so many oversight hearings in each committee with the agencies under your jurisdiction. Now, we do in the Science Committee. I'm an unabashed cheerleader for the National Science Foundation, for example, which is in the jurisdiction of the Science Committee. Essentially, it funds most university-based research in America, which is great for competition, for the development of new products and new opportunities. And I make no bones about it. I think they're doing wonderful work. But we call the NSF people in every year, and we go over programs, and we say, gee, we think this is fine, but this doesn't seem to be working so well. How do you explain that? And you're seeing more oversight now, and I bet you in the next Congress, I won't be here, but as I look back, and I'm going to follow it very carefully, as I look back, I bet you're going to see a lot more oversight.
But has Congress, as some say, some experts and certainly Democrats again, has it given away any of its power of the moment, because these things are obviously cyclical, to the executive branch because of the...
Some people accuse us of doing that, but you know, it's a tug of war all the time. Look, I'll tell you what the executive branch thinks, whether it's George Bush or Bill Clinton or anyone sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The legislative branch is an inconvenient truth. Now, that's not a plug for Al Gore's movie, but you know, they don't really want to deal with us, and it would be far better for them, they think, obviously, if we didn't interfere in their business and they could run everything. And we, on the other hand, we think, well, the administration doesn't understand it. They don't have the depth of understanding, and they should listen more to us. But this comes up all the time with Iraq. We've ceded too much responsibility to the commander-in-chief, the president. And I say, look, put yourself in the shoes of George Walker Bush, the President of the United States. You get a briefing every morning by the Director of Central Intelligence Agency, who comes in 7:30 or 8 in the morning, closed doors, got to have a top classification to hear what he has to say. He's got the compilation of all the information gathered over the previous 24 hours from satellites in the heavens and spies in the field and talking to allies, and he said, condensation, here it is. So he comes into the Oval Office, Mr. President, not only is Iraq bad, not only is Saddam Hussein evil, but they have weapons of mass destruction. Not only that, they've used them. How else do you explain 400,000 dead Kurds in the north? They weren't popped off one by one. They were victims of chemical or biological warfare, which is weapons of mass destruction. And so the president listens, asks the questions, and the briefing's all over, out he goes. In comes the Secretary of Defense, Don Rumsfeld. Mr. President, I know you've got that briefing from the intelligence community. I'll tell you what, we've got to go in there. They'll greet us as liberators. They'll throw flowers at our feet. And so he's got the advice there. I remember from my days on the Intelligence Committee, and I served beyond the 6-year limitation. The speaker and the conference granted me a 2-year extension, so I served 8 years over and above the term limit because they thought I should serve. I remember David Kay, the arms inspector, internationally recognized, testifying before our committee, and I'm not violating the sanctity of that committee, their classification, because this has since come into the public domain. David Kay saying to us, very specifically, given the information the president was given, when it was given, I came to the same conclusion, this international expert. Now, we haven't found the weapons of mass destruction. They're elusive, they're nowhere to be found. But I think part of the problem is too many people are thinking the old way. Some big 2-ton bomb that you can see a couple blocks away. You might be talking about a 6-ounce vial of some deadly agent. Who knows? They might still be there. That's not to excuse what's going on in Iraq, but that's to help explain more of what's going on in Iraq.